Recently, I saw a really interesting article by Henry Kissinger, and it was about the coronavirus. I think it's really interesting because he talks a little bit about realism and how the coronavirus might interfere with international politics. So, if you know anything about Kissinger, you know that he's a kind of realist in the sense of the traditional IR kind of understanding of realist. So, realpolitik, right? Practice bargaining and power differences and thinking about international relations in terms of power differentials and how to deal with other states in a negotiating kind of way. So he was primarily working with the U.S. and Soviet relations and did a lot of work with diplomacy and détente, as well as working with issues with China. And he's probably one of the most famous diplomats in U.S. history. So when he writes an article, people listen. And this one is quite interesting in some respect. I mean, I think a lot of what it says is sort of rehashing some other kinds of arguments. But one of the things that I found really interesting in the article, and I'd like to talk about that really briefly. So one of the things the article talks about specifically is that all the countries are, quote, hell-bent on ensuring their own survival with the doors closed to each other. Nations cohere and flourish on the belief that their institutions can foresee calamity, arrest its impact, and restore stability. When the COVID-19 pandemic is over, many countries' institutions will be perceived as having failed, he said, right? Now, he's 96 years old, but I think he's got this pretty correct. I think, as I mentioned before in other videos, every country's policy is going to be seen as a failure. Nothing's going to work perfectly, and so it's going to be very easy to find the flaws in every policy from every country around the world. And in addition, it's going to be really hard to know what the actual effects of those policies were. We don't have good counterfactuals, so we can't say what would have happened otherwise. So there's going to be a lot of politics here and a lot of pointing fingers at different countries and saying your policy didn't work. Kissinger added by saying, while the assault on human health will hopefully be temporary, the political and economic upheaval it has unleashed could last for generations. The pandemic has prompted an anachronism, a revival of the walled city in an age when prosperity depends on global trade and movement of people. And this is very, very important. So a lot of people calling for policies that lock in countries, that lock in people, and so to protect them from this virus. And this is sort of an instinct, right? So if you have some scary thing out there, the best thing to do is to hide and to lock yourself in and escape from that scary thing, right? It's sort of the fight or flight instinct, except we're just looking at the flight and we're not looking at the fight. But at the same time, we are in a global system now where we require global cooperation, and we require, trade and movement of people around the world as a basic element of our life. And without those things, we could have serious consequences. Now, the one thing that I want to point to in terms of realism that I think this relates to IR theory a little bit more is that, generally speaking, realism talks about the different kinds of bipolar systems and unipolar and multipolar systems and how the system is what it is, right? And realism doesn't talk a lot about how the system changes. And we know that through history, most of the time, the system has made these dramatic changes through big, scary exogenous events, right? External to the theories themselves. So the collapse of the Soviet Union was a good example. World War I and World War II are another good examples, right? These big events that maybe aren't in the theories themselves, but that change the dynamic of the world. So the question now is for Kissinger and for everyone else is this one of those events? Is the coronavirus one of those events that's going to change the international global structure? Can China change the balance of power? China has already increased its presence in the South China Sea. And maybe Russia is making some moves. Maybe the United States will decline a little bit. I don't know. But this is the kind of event that can change the structure of the world. And Kissinger is saying that, and I think that we should all think about that and consider how well this represents another World War II or the collapse of the Soviet Union. If you like these videos, make sure you give it a good thumbs up, subscribe, more content, watch the other videos that I've already published, and enjoy. Leave your comments and questions below.